The photograph. The rain drizzled steadily over New York City, a symphony of droplets tapping against windows and pavement. It was the kind of gray afternoon that urged people to retreat indoors, seeking warmth and comfort. For Barron Trump, now 18 and standing an impressive 6'7", the rain was both a shield and a shroud. He moved briskly through the crowded streets, his security detail forming a protective bubble around him. Today, he wasn't in the mood to deal with the curious stares or the occasional hushed whispers of recognition. He longed for a quiet moment, free from the public eye. As he pushed open the door to a quaint, dimly lit cafe, the warm aroma of freshly brewed coffee enveloped him. The establishment was modest but inviting, its wooden furniture and soft lighting providing a stark contrast to the cold, wet streets outside. Barron selected a seat by the window, his towering frame drawing a few glances from other patrons. He removed his raincoat, shook off the droplets, and settled into the chair, savoring the warmth of the steaming cup of coffee placed before him. He hadn't been there long when an elderly man approached. The man's raincoat dripped onto the floor, his face weathered and tired. His hands, trembling slightly, clutched something tightly. Barron's security team immediately stiffened, moving to intercept the man. But Barron, sensing no threat, raised a hand to halt them. "Mr. Trump," the man said softly, his voice carrying the weight of years. "I need to give you something." Barron hesitated. The man's presence was unassuming, almost ghost-like, but there was an urgency in his tone that piqued Barron's curiosity. He nodded, allowing the man to proceed. From the depths of his coat pocket, the stranger produced a small, crumpled photograph. It was old, the edges worn and faded, as though it had traveled through time itself. Barron took it cautiously, his eyes immediately drawn to the image. It depicted a young girl, perhaps 6 or 7 years old, with bright eyes and an infectious smile. She wore a dress that seemed to belong to another era, her hair tied in neat pigtails. "This is her," the man whispered, his voice barely audible above the soft hum of the cafe. "She needs your help." Before Barron could respond, the man turned and walked out into the rain, disappearing into the gray haze. Stunned, Barron sat there, the photograph still in his hand, his mind racing with questions. Who was the girl? Why had the man chosen him? And what kind of help did she need? Back in his penthouse that evening, Barron couldn't shake the image of the little girl. He placed the photograph under the warm glow of a desk lamp, studying it carefully. Her face was hauntingly familiar, yet he couldn't pinpoint why. Turning the photo over, he noticed a handwritten note on the back. "Find her. She needs you." The words were simple yet cryptic, their meaning eluding him. Determined to uncover the truth, Barron called his lead security officer, Mr. Howard, into the room. "Can you find out who this is?" Barron asked, handing him the photograph. Mr. Howard examined the photo with a furrowed brow. "It looks decades old, but I'll see what I can uncover," he said before leaving to begin the investigation. Barron spent the night scrolling through old family albums, hoping to find a clue. His search was interrupted when his mother, Melania, entered the room. She noticed the photograph on the desk and paused, her expression shifting to one of unease. "Who is that?" she asked, her voice tinged with concern. "I don't know," Barron replied honestly. "A man gave it to me today and said she needs my help." Melania's face turned pale. She reached for the photograph, but stopped short, her hand trembling slightly. "Be careful, Barron," she said, her tone now grave. "Some things are better left alone." Her reaction only deepened Barron's resolve. What was his mother not telling him? And why did she seem afraid? The next morning, Mr. Howard returned with preliminary findings. "The photograph is old, likely from the 1970s, he began. "I cross-referenced it with archived records and found something peculiar." He handed Barron a printout of a newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Missing Child Disappears After Orphanage Fire." Barron's heart sank as he read the article. The girl in the photograph was identified as Emily Harper, a child who had gone missing after a devastating fire consumed her orphanage in 1978. Despite extensive searches, no trace of her was ever found. Her case remained a mystery. "Why would someone give this to me now?" Barron asked, his voice filled with both curiosity and frustration. "That's the mystery," Mr. Howard replied. "But whoever handed you the photo seems to know something." Barron leaned back in his chair, staring at the article and the photograph side by side. The coincidence was too significant to ignore. Someone wanted him to solve this decades-old mystery, but why him? With a deep breath, Barron made a decision. "We're going to find Emily Harper," he declared, his tone resolute. "No matter what it takes." The search began in earnest, but Barron quickly realized he was embarking on a journey that would challenge everything he thought he knew about himself and the world. As he retraced the steps of a story buried in the past, he couldn't shake the feeling that Emily Harper's fate was somehow intertwined with his own. What he didn't yet understand was just how profoundly this quest would alter his life, and the lives of countless others. The mystery deepens. The rain had stopped by morning, leaving the streets of New York slick and glistening under the pale winter sunlight. Barron Trump stood at the window of his penthouse, looking out over the bustling city. His thoughts weren't on the skyline, the people below, or even the responsibilities awaiting him that day. Instead, his focus remained on the photograph, a relic of another time, carrying secrets no one seemed willing to reveal. Mr. Howard, his security chief, had promised to dig deeper into the origins of the photograph and the man who had given it to Barron. True to his word, Howard returned later that afternoon with a detailed report. "I've managed to gather more information," Howard began, placing a folder on the table. Barron opened it, his eyes scanning the contents eagerly. There were more articles about Emily Harper, the girl in the photograph, each one painting a picture of tragedy and mystery. The fire at St. Mary's Orphanage in 1978 had been devastating. 27 children had perished in the blaze, along with several staff members. Emily Harper was listed among the missing, presumed dead. However, some accounts hinted at something strange. Witnesses claimed to have seen a man running from the scene carrying a small child. Others reported hearing whispers of a rescue attempt gone awry. "That's not all," Howard added, sliding another document forward. It was an enhanced image of the cafe's surveillance footage. The elderly man who had handed Barron the photograph was clearer now. His lined face, tired eyes, and determined expression suggested a man burdened by something far greater than age. "We ran facial recognition," Howard continued. "The man's name is Arthur Grayson. He was a firefighter in the 1970s, stationed near St. Mary's Orphanage. He retired years ago, but records show he was one of the first responders to the fire." Barron's brow furrowed. If he was at the fire, why would he wait decades to approach me? And how did he even know about me? Howard shrugged. That's where the trail ends for now. Grayson vanished after leaving the cafe. No credit card transactions, no public sightings. It's as if he planned to disappear. Barron leaned back, staring at the image of Grayson. "He risked everything to give me this photograph," he murmured. "Whatever his reasons, they must be important." Later that day, Barron decided to visit St. Mary's Orphanage, or rather, what remained of it. The building had been abandoned after the fire, left as a skeletal reminder of the tragedy. Overgrown ivy clung to the charred walls, and broken windows gaped like empty eyes. Barron stood at the edge of the property, his security team keeping a watchful distance. As he stepped inside, the air grew still, heavy with an unshakable sense of loss. The main hall was a ruin, its walls blackened and ceilings partially caved in. Yet amidst the decay, remnants of the past lingered. A rusted tricycle, a scorched doll, and faded murals on the walls, depicting scenes of children playing in an era long gone. Barron moved cautiously, his footsteps echoing in the silence. He felt an inexplicable pull, as though the building itself was urging him forward. In the corner of what once might have been a classroom, he found something strange, A small locked box partially buried under debris. The metal was tarnished, but the initials E were etched onto the lid. He picked it up, brushing off the dirt. Could this have belonged to Emily Harper? The box was light, as if it held only a few items, but the lock resisted his attempts to open it. Frustrated but undeterred, Barron decided to take it back to the penthouse. That evening, he worked to open the box. After several failed attempts, he enlisted the help of a locksmith. When the box finally clicked open, its contents revealed a chilling piece of the puzzle. Inside were several items: a locket, a faded note, and a small key. The locket contained a photo of Emily and another child, a boy who looked slightly older. The note, scrawled in shaky handwriting, read, "Emily is alive. Protect her." Barron's hands trembled as he read the words. His heart raced with a mix of excitement and dread. Was it possible that Emily Harper had survived the fire? If so, where had she been for the past 4 decades? And who was the boy in the locket? The small key was the final mystery. It didn't match the lock on the box, suggesting it opened something else entirely. Barron examined it closely, noting the faint markings along its edges. The letters "or" were engraved at the base. The next day, Barron returned to Howard with the new discoveries. Howard examined the key in the note, his expression growing graver with each passing moment. "Or might stand for Oak Ridge," he suggested. "It's an abandoned facility about 30 miles outside the city. It used to house children after the orphanage burned down, but it closed in the early 1980s. Some say it wasn't safe for the children, but no one ever confirmed why." Barron's mind raced. Could Oak Ridge be where Emily had been taken? And if so, had she stayed there? Was the boy in the locket connected to that place? The questions seemed endless, but Barron knew one thing for certain. He had to visit Oak Ridge. That afternoon, Barron and Howard set out for the facility. The drive was long and winding, taking them through forests and remote areas rarely traveled. When they arrived, the sight before them was foreboding. Oak Ridge was a massive, sprawling complex, its once grand architecture now in ruins. Vines and moss covered the crumbling walls, and the surrounding area was eerily quiet, as though nature itself had abandoned the place. Barron hesitated at the gates, a sense of unease settling over him. Yet he knew he couldn't turn back. With Howard by his side, he pushed open the rusted doors and stepped inside. The air was damp and musty, filled with the smell of decay. Rooms once filled with laughter and life now stood empty, their walls adorned with peeling paint and forgotten memories. As they moved deeper into the building, they came across a series of locked doors, each marked with numbers. The key from the box seemed to match these locks. Barron inserted the key into the nearest door and turned it. The lock clicked open, revealing a small room filled with old files and photographs. Among them, Barron found something extraordinary: a list of names, each one crossed out except for 2. The names read, Emily Harper, Daniel Harper. Daniel, the boy in the locket. The shadows of Oak Ridge. The room was silent, save for the faint creak of the rusted hinges as Barron stepped inside. Dust motes floated in the thin beam of sunlight that managed to penetrate the grime-covered window. The air was heavy, almost oppressive, as though the walls carried the weight of every secret ever whispered within them. Barron stared at the list of names: Emily Harper and Daniel Harper. His mind raced. Who was Daniel? And why was his name on the list alongside Emily's? Were they siblings? Friends? The questions mounted as Barron's hands trembled slightly, the list fluttering in his grip. Mr. Howard, standing by the door, broke the silence. If these names were part of the orphanage records, it's possible Daniel was also at Oak Ridge after the fire. But why would he be listed here and not in any public records? Barron looked up, determination flaring in his eyes. Because someone wanted to hide them, he replied. Whoever locked this room, whoever left these files, they knew Emily and Daniel were special. And they didn't want the world to know. He carefully folded the list and placed it in his jacket pocket. We need to find out everything we can about Daniel Harper. If he's alive, he might know what happened to Emily." Howard nodded, but his expression was grim. If this place was abandoned in the 1980s, anyone who stayed here might not have survived. And if Daniel did, he could be anywhere now. As they continued exploring Oak Ridge, the labyrinth of corridors led them to another locked door. Barron's heart quickened as he retrieved the small key. It fit perfectly, and the lock clicked open with a metallic groan. The room beyond was different from the others. It wasn't just a storage space. It looked like an office frozen in time. A desk sat in the center, papers scattered across its surface. The walls were lined with filing cabinets, some drawers slightly ajar. On the desk was a leather-bound journal, its edges worn and frayed. Barron approached it cautiously, his fingers brushing the cover before opening it. The first page contained a name, Dr. Victor Reynolds. Beneath it was a date, July 15, 1979. Howard peered over Barron's shoulder as he flipped through the pages. The journal appeared to be the personal notes of a doctor or administrator who had worked at Oak Ridge. The entries were detailed, chronicling the children who had been transferred to the facility after the St. Mary's fire. Barron's eyes scanned the text, searching for Emily or Daniel's names. Finally, he found an entry dated September 2, 1979. Emily Harper and Daniel Harper arrived today. Both exhibit signs of severe trauma. Emily has recurring nightmares and refuses to speak. Daniel is fiercely protective of her, but his behavior is erratic. He speaks of keeping her safe from something he calls the shadow. I'm not sure what he means, but it's clear these children have been through more than just the fire. The words sent a chill down Barron's spine. He read on, unable to stop. September 15, 1979. Emily and Daniel are different. Their bond is extraordinary, almost unnatural. Emily has begun drawing strange symbols during her therapy sessions, symbols I've never seen before. Daniel grows agitated whenever anyone tries to separate them. I've requested additional staff to monitor them closely. Howard frowned as Barron read the entries aloud. What does he mean by different? And what are these symbols? Barron shook his head. I don't know, but it sounds like they were being watched, maybe even studied. The next entry was even more troubling. October 3, 1979. Daniel attacked one of the staff today. He claimed the man was hurting Emily. Though no evidence supports this, Emily was hysterical, and it took 3 staff members to restrain Daniel. I've recommended he be isolated for a time, but I fear this may only exacerbate his paranoia. Barron closed the journal, his mind reeling. They weren't just orphans. Something about them drew attention, something that made people want to control them. Howard pointed to the filing cabinets. If there are medical or behavioral records here, we might find more. They spent the next hour combing through the files. Most were mundane reports about other children who had stayed at Oak Ridge, but a few stood out. One file contained a series of photographs, including one of Emily and Daniel. They were standing side by side in a drab room, their expressions somber. Emily clutched a small stuffed bear, while Daniel's gaze was intense, almost defiant. Another file contained a map of the Oak Ridge grounds. Several areas were marked with red circles, including a section labeled Restricted. Do you think these areas still exist? Barron asked, holding up the map. Howard studied it closely. If they were underground or reinforced, it's possible. We should check. Following the map, they made their way to a part of the facility that was almost entirely concealed by overgrowth. A heavy metal door, partially rusted but intact, barred their path. It bore the words "Authorized personnel only" in faded paint. Barron felt the weight of the small key in his pocket. He tried it, but the lock didn't budge. Howard, however, was prepared. Producing a set of tools, he worked on the lock until it gave way with a reluctant clank. The door swung open to reveal a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The air grew colder as they descended, and the faint hum of something electrical echoed faintly. At the bottom of the stairs, they found a corridor lined with reinforced doors. Some were labeled with numbers. Others had names. At the end of the hallway was a large door marked Observation Room. Barron hesitated, his hand on the handle. "This is it," he said, his voice steady despite the unease gnawing at him. When they stepped inside, the room felt like a tomb. Monitors, long inactive, lined the walls. In the center was a table surrounded by chairs, papers scattered across its surface. Barron picked up one of the documents, his heart sinking as he read. Subject: Emily Harper. Age: 7. Observation period: indefinite. Notes: high cognitive abilities, unexplained emotional resonance with other subjects. Potential anomalous activity requires further study. Another paper detailed Daniel Harper. Subject: Daniel Harper. Age: 9. Observation period: indefinite. Notes: extremely protective of Emily. Displays violent tendencies when perceiving threats. Possible connection to unexplained phenomena. Barron's breath caught as he read the final line. Subjects relocated under Project Haven. Facility closed as per directive. "What's Project Haven?" Howard asked. "I don't know," Barron replied. "But if they were relocated, it means they survived. We need to find out where they went." As they left the observation room, Barron's resolve hardened. The deeper he dug, the more tangled the mystery became. Who were Emily and Daniel Harper? What had they experienced at Oak Ridge? And why had someone chosen him, of all people, to uncover their story? The answers lay ahead, but one thing was clear: this was no ordinary journey. Barron wasn't just uncovering the past. He was stepping into a shadowy world that had remained hidden for decades, a world that seemed to be waiting for him. Project Haven. The car ride back to the city was silent. Barron Trump sat in the back seat, the folder from Oak Ridge clutched tightly in his lap. Beside him, Mr. Howard was typing furiously on his tablet, his face etched with determination. The phrase Project Haven had taken root in both their minds, a seed of intrigue and unease. What was it? And where had it taken Emily and Daniel Harper? When they arrived at the penthouse, Barron wasted no time. He spread the documents across his desk, organizing them by relevance. Maps, journal entries, photographs, and observation reports all pointed to one undeniable truth. The Harpers were no ordinary children. Something about them had warranted secrecy, surveillance, and ultimately, their disappearance. The next morning, Howard entered the room holding a thick binder. His expression was a mix of triumph and concern. "I dug deeper," he began, placing the binder on the table. Project Haven wasn't just a relocation program. It was a government initiative, highly classified. Barron's eyes widened. "Government? You mean this was sanctioned?" Howard nodded grimly. "From what I've uncovered, Project Haven was designed to protect individuals deemed to possess unique or anomalous traits. But that's just the official story. There's speculation it was a cover for something far darker. Experimentation, control, maybe even weaponization." Barron leaned forward, his mind racing. "You think Emily and Daniel were taken as part of this project? And if so, where?" Howard flipped open the binder, revealing a map with several locations marked. "These are the known sites associated with Project Haven. Most have been decommissioned, but one facility in upstate New York remains active." Barron's jaw tightened. "We need to go there." Howard hesitated. "Barron, this isn't just another abandoned building. If this is still an active government facility, we could be walking into something dangerous." Barron met his gaze, his voice steady. "I have to know the truth. If Emily and Daniel are alive, they deserve to be found." The journey to the facility was tense. Barron insisted on going despite Howard's protests, bringing only a skeleton crew of trusted security personnel. The drive was long, winding through dense forests and empty roads. When they arrived, the facility was barely visible from the road, hidden behind a high fence topped with razor wire. Cameras were strategically placed along the perimeter, their lenses scanning for intruders. Howard parked the SUV at a safe distance, pulling out a pair of binoculars. "This isn't going to be easy," he muttered. "The place is heavily guarded." Barron studied the layout. The building itself was nondescript, blending into the surrounding forest. But the guards patrolling the perimeter and the high-tech surveillance suggested it was far from ordinary. "We need a way in," Barron said, his voice firm. Howard hesitated before handing him a tablet. "I've hacked into their external camera feeds. We'll have a limited window when the guards rotate. But if we're caught—" "I understand the risks," Barron interrupted. "Let's do this." They waited until nightfall. Under the cover of darkness, Barron and Howard moved toward the facility, avoiding the camera angles displayed on the tablet. When they reached the fence, Howard produced a pair of wire cutters and began working on a section hidden by thick brush. The opening was barely large enough for them to squeeze through, but it worked. Once inside, they made their way toward a side entrance. Howard used a portable device to disable the electronic lock, and the door creaked open, revealing a sterile, brightly lit corridor. The interior of the facility was a stark contrast to its exterior. The walls were pristine white, and the air smelled faintly of antiseptic. The hum of fluorescent lights filled the silence as Barron and Howard moved cautiously through the halls. Every step felt like it echoed for miles. They came across several rooms, each labeled with cryptic codes. Most were locked, but one door stood ajar. Inside was a small office, cluttered with papers and computer screens. Barron rifled through the documents, searching for anything related to Emily or Daniel. "Over here," Howard called, pointing to a computer. The screen displayed a file directory, and one folder caught their attention. H. Harper Siblings. Barron sat down, his hand shaking slightly as he clicked on the folder. Inside were dozens of files, photos, videos, and reports. One document, marked Status Update, Emily Harper, contained a recent date. "She's alive," Barron whispered, his heart pounding. "They're still monitoring her." Howard frowned. "What about Daniel?" Barron searched the directory, but Daniel's file was different. It was marked as inactive, subject deceased. "No," Barron said, shaking his head. "It can't be." Howard placed a hand on his shoulder. "We don't know the circumstances, but if Emily is still here, we need to focus on finding her." Following the information in the files, they navigated deeper into the facility. The atmosphere grew colder, the air tinged with an inexplicable heaviness. Barron's pulse quickened as they approached the secured wing. The door was reinforced, requiring both a keycard and a code. Howard worked quickly, using his tools to bypass the lock. When the door finally slid open, they stepped into a dimly lit corridor lined with observation rooms. Each room had a small window, and Barron's stomach churned as he looked inside. The rooms were stark and clinical, each containing a bed, a desk, and little else. In one room, he saw a young woman sitting by the window, her back to them. Her hair was long and dark, cascading over her shoulders like a curtain. "That's her," Barron whispered, recognizing Emily from the photograph. Howard moved to the control panel, unlocking the door. It hissed open, and Emily turned slowly, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. She looked older, her face thinner, but there was no mistaking her. "Emily," Barron said softly, stepping forward. "My name is Barron. I'm here to help you." She didn't respond immediately, her gaze darting between him and Howard. Then, as if realizing something, she whispered, "Daniel sent you." Barron froze. "Daniel? But he's gone." Emily shook her head, tears brimming in her eyes. "No, he's not gone. He's the reason I'm still here. He's the reason they're afraid of me." Before Barron could ask more, an alarm blared through the facility, red lights flashing along the walls. Howard cursed under his breath. "They know we're here. We need to move. Now." Emily hesitated, but Barron extended his hand. "We'll get you out of here, I promise." She took his hand, her grip firm despite her trembling. Together, they ran back through the corridors, Howard leading the way. Guards were converging on their location, their voices echoing through the halls. When they reached the exit, they found themselves cornered. Guards stood at both ends of the corridor, weapons drawn. Barron shielded Emily instinctively, his mind racing for a way out. But before the guards could act, Emily stepped forward. Her eyes glowed faintly, and the air around her seemed to ripple. The guards froze, their expressions shifting from determination to fear. "You won't hurt them," Emily said, her voice calm but commanding. The guards lowered their weapons, stepping aside as though compelled by an unseen force. Barron stared in disbelief, but there was no time for questions. They ran through the exit, disappearing into the night. Back in the car, Emily sat silently, her gaze distant. Barron turned to her, his voice soft. "Emily, what just happened back there?" She looked at him, her eyes filled with both sadness and strength. "You've only scratched the surface," she said. "There's so much you don't know. About me, about Daniel, about why they're so afraid of us." Barron nodded, his determination unwavering. "Then tell me everything." The journey wasn't over. It had only just begun. Unraveling the truth. The SUV sped down a deserted road under the cover of darkness, headlights cutting through the mist. Emily sat in the back seat beside Barron, her thin frame curled into herself as though trying to disappear. She hadn't spoken since they'd escaped the facility, her eyes fixed on the horizon, lost in thought. Barron's mind swirled with questions, but he held them back, giving her the space she seemed to need. Mr. Howard, seated in the front, broke the silence. "We're not out of the woods yet," he said, his voice tense. "If that facility is as important as it seems, they'll come after us. We need a safe house. Now." Barron nodded. "Take us to the cabin in the Catskills. It's remote enough, and we can regroup there." Howard glanced at Emily in the rearview mirror. If they're tracking her, it might not be enough. Emily finally spoke, her voice soft but resolute. "They won't find us. Not right now. I made sure of it." Her words sent a chill down Barron's spine. He didn't press her for details, but he couldn't ignore the memory of what had happened back at the facility. The way the guards had stopped, their fear palpable, as if under her control. The cabin was nestled deep in the woods, surrounded by towering pines that swayed gently in the night breeze. It was simple but comfortable, with a large stone fireplace and enough space for the small group to rest. Emily hesitated at the door, her eyes scanning the surroundings as though expecting someone, or something. "Emily," Barron said gently, "you're safe here. No one will hurt you." She nodded, stepping inside. The warmth of the cabin seemed to ease her tension slightly, but her shoulders remained stiff, her movements cautious. After a brief meal, they gathered in the living room. The fire crackled softly, casting flickering shadows on the walls. Emily sat in a chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, while Barron and Howard sat across from her. "Emily," Barron began, his tone careful, "I know this is overwhelming, but we need to understand what's happening. Who are you? What happened to you and Daniel?" Her eyes flickered with pain at the mention of Daniel's name. She took a deep breath, her voice trembling as she began to speak. "We weren't like the others," she said. "Even as children, we knew we were different. After the fire at Street Mary's, they took us to Oak Ridge. At first, we thought it was a place to heal, but it wasn't." "What was it?" Barron asked. Emily's gaze dropped to the floor. "A prison. They called it a sanctuary, but they were watching us, studying us. They knew what we could do, and they were afraid of it." "What could you do?" Howard asked, his voice cautious but intrigued. Emily hesitated, then looked up. Her eyes glimmered faintly, the same eerie glow Barron had seen at the facility. The air in the room seemed to shift, growing heavier, as if charged with static electricity. A glass on the table began to tremble, then lifted into the air. spinning slowly before settling back down. Barron and Howard stared in stunned silence. They called it anomalous activity, Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. But to us, it was just part of who we were. Daniel was stronger than me. He could control more, influence people's thoughts, even manipulate their actions. But he was also unstable. They pushed him too far, and he couldn't handle it. Her voice broke, tears welling in her eyes. They tried to separate us. They said it was for our safety, but Daniel didn't believe them. He fought back. And she paused, struggling to continue. They said he died. But I don't think that's true. I still feel him. Barron leaned forward, his heart aching for her. What do you mean you feel him? Emily wiped her tears, her gaze steady now. He's not gone. I don't know where he is, but I can sense him. He's out there, and he's in pain. Howard, ever the pragmatist, shifted uncomfortably. If what you're saying is true, Emily, it explains why they want to keep you hidden. Your abilities, they're extraordinary. But why now? Why did they give Barron the photograph? Emily turned to Barron, her expression unreadable. Because of who you are. Because they knew you would care enough to find me. Barron frowned. How could they know that? Daniel, she said simply. He knew. He must have found a way to reach out to someone outside the facility. Maybe it was the man who gave you the photograph. Arthur Grayson, Barron said, the name tasting foreign on his tongue. He was a firefighter at Street Mary's. He must have known about you and Daniel. Emily nodded. If Daniel trusted him, it means Grayson believed in us. But that also means we're running out of time. The people who took us, they won't stop. As the night deepened, they pored over the files from Oak Ridge and the facility, searching for clues about Project Haven. One document stood out, a map with a series of coordinates. Emily pointed to one location, her finger trembling. This, she said, this is where they took Daniel. The coordinates led to a remote site in Montana, listed as a decommissioned Project Haven facility. But a handwritten note beside it read, reactivated, subject storage. Barron's chest tightened. We have to go there. Howard frowned. Barron, this isn't a rescue mission. We don't know what we're walking into. I don't care, Barron replied, his voice firm. Daniel sacrificed everything to protect Emily. If there's even a chance he's alive, we have to try. Emily looked at him, her eyes shimmering with hope and fear. If we find him, you need to know, he won't be the same. They've taken everything from him. His freedom, his mind, maybe even his soul, but he's still my brother. Barron nodded, his resolve unshaken. Then we'll bring him back, no matter what it takes. The next morning, they set out for Montana, the weight of their mission heavy on their shoulders. As the miles passed, Barron couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the brink of something far greater than any of them had imagined. The Harper's story wasn't just about two siblings with extraordinary abilities. It was about the lengths people would go to control what they feared. And as they approached the facility, he knew one thing for certain. The fight to uncover the truth had only just begun.